It's Tuesday night, 8 o'clock, and this is the Bob Leonard Show. We'll be with you for about an hour, and like we tell you every week, we take the stories you've been watching on television, reading in the newspaper over the last week or so, and we put our spin on it. We give you our interpretation of those stories. Often the mainstream news media doesn't have the time to go into these stories in depth, but we do, and we give you our opinion on these stories. And like we tell you every week, it's only our opinion. You can accept or reject it. But obviously we're going to have our say. Now if you miss this program tonight, like we tell you every week, it's on Wednesday night, tomorrow night also, from 11 till 12. So those of you who can stay up and you miss it tonight, you can watch it tomorrow night. Now, if you can't stay up and you miss it tonight, it's also shown on a 24-hour basis on flinttalk.com. flinttalk.com. So you just take your computers out, hit flinttalk.com, and the program will come up. And there's about 6 or 8 of them they have there. You just pick the one you want to hear, push the number or whatever it tells you to do, and the program will start from the beginning and go all the way to the end. So we're there, available to be seen if you want to see us. Now, we've been with you about 8 years now on this program, preparing these programs, doing these investigations, and exposing corruption and wrongdoing in government and business and unions, whatever the case may be. Now, after, I think it's December 4th, everybody will be gone from public access television. It's closed down. So this is one of our last programs. The state has taken over the public access channels, apparently, or whatever. They've taken over the authority to run these things. So of course, the local government people are very happy with it, because who's going to be checking on them? And the regular news media will again be just taking their handouts where they're patting themselves on the back. Nobody will be around to go behind these stories. So we're sorry. We'd like to stay, but everybody on public access Comcast is gone. It's gone. So this is it. We have about 3 more programs, I guess, and unless something changes, and I don't know what would change, but Comcast is interested in making money, and the state people want control of the airwaves, so that's what happened. So in the meantime, we have some stories we want to talk to you about. There's an old proverb. This proverb you've heard many, many times, and it's more often the rule than the exception, that I'm sure many of you have heard of and believe it to be true. It goes something like this: you can't fight City Hall, implying the people who control the government can do whatever they want and get away with whatever they want to do. Like I said, it's more often the rule than the exception. Now, a couple of weeks ago, in a case involving the Township of Vienna and Supervisor Anthony McKechnie, became the exception to the rule when 2 women brought an action against the Vienna Township and McKechnie, and they decided to take on City Hall. Now, this case involved a First Amendment violation of these young women's freedom of speech, and they were expressing themselves, and McKechnie retaliated against them by destroying their business. Now, we interviewed these young ladies' attorney, Tom Pabst and Mike Kowalko, and both these are outstanding attorneys. Pabst and Kowalko are considered by most trial judges as, two of the best trial attorneys in mid-Michigan. Well, they took their case, and as a result, they got over $750,000 in a jury verdict against Vienna Township and McCurchie. Now, Papps, who specializes in these constitutional law violations, he also is an expert in the employer discrimination cases, libel, slander actions. Those are specialties that these two young attorneys have. So these people went to them because of their specialty in constitutional violations. And as a result, they won this very big verdict because their rights were violated by a government agency, in this case Vienna Township and Mr. McCurchie. Now, we went and interviewed Tom Papps about this case, and we'd like to show you that interview. Here's an interview we had with Tom Papps, attorney that represented these two women on the violation of their constitutional rights. Can you play that, please?
We want to talk to Attorney Papps today about a case that he has just finished where he received a judgment in a jury trial, and it's really kind of a landmark case and sets precedent that probably will have ramifications in not only legal circles but government circles and taxpayer circles. And I wonder if you could tell us what that case was about, how it started, and what the history is, and why it's so significant.
Well, it's significant because you can fight City Hall and win. I represented a wonderful family, the Wayon family, Dave Wayon, Terry Wayon, and Dave's daughter, Stephanie Nelson. They had a towing business called Dave and Terry's Towing, and a problem arose in the business where a disgruntled customer came in and used the most vile language possible. Too indecent to even say in polite company, and certainly on your TV program, but he called her a rotten name, and they went to City Hall because there's a law, there's an ordinance against that happening in front of women and children using that type of language. So they went to City Hall, their elected leaders, for help, which people do, and the elected leader, Tony McCurchie, after, this was caught on tape, he looked at the tape, he turns around to the woman, Stephanie Nelson, who was there and was called the name, and says, "There's your problem. Get rid of her and get a man in here. Get a man who can handle these type of customers when they come in irate." And Terry and Dave, and there were other people in the room, many people, and they said, "I can't believe you just said that. Get rid of her." Dave says, "That's my daughter. She's been running this business for 12 years without a problem. Why would I get rid of her?" So a couple days later, Dave is talking with Tony McCurchie on the telephone, and Tony McCurchie says, "Listen, smart ass, you do what I say or I'll destroy your fucking business. You got that?" And he did it. He did. He did destroy their business. The way he did it was when Dave didn't fire his daughter or have Terry fire Dave's daughter, Terry's daughter-in-law, Tony McCurchie went to the sheriff, who's got the contract with the township for the towing, and he says to the sheriff, "Don't do business with Dave and Terry's anymore." So all of a sudden, the calls stopped coming. Nobody was calling Dave and Terry's. They had no business. All the business dried up. Their business went belly up. He actually drove them out of business. That's what happened. And what happened in the lawsuit was someone could say, "How can you prove that? How can you prove that he went to the sheriff and said that?" That became the determining issue in the lawsuit. And this is exactly the blow-up of deposition testimony that the judge saw and that the jurors saw. You know, in cases, there's a lot of time to prepare them. You can take statements from people under oath with both attorneys present, you know, and then you can use it later in trial. Well, here's a portion of the sworn deposition testimony of defendant Anthony McCurchie. Question, answer, question, answer. Here's what he said under oath at his death. Question, do you know if the sheriff is not using Dave and Terry's at all for towing in Vienna Township? Answer, I don't know if they are not. Question, are you saying here today that you have nothing to do with who the sheriff uses? Answer, right. The sheriff has got a contract. He hires who he chooses, not Vienna Township. We have no contract with no towing companies, Vienna Township. Then later on in the dep, I said, question, and I see you deny ever having a conversation with Sheriff Pickell where you said don't use David Terry's, correct? You deny that. Answer, right. That's what he said under oath at his deposition. Well, here's what the sheriff said under oath at his deposition and at trial. Question, and Mr. McCurchie and Scott did express to you their desire that they didn't want to do business with David Terry's Towing, correct? Answer, yes. Question, and then after, answer, I don't know if it was Dick Scott, but I know at least Tony McCurchie. Well, there you have it. There you have it. That's exactly what the jury was faced with. Who are they going to believe? A sheriff of Genesee County who's got nothing to win or lose in this whole thing? In fact, he didn't want to be there. He didn't want to be there, but he was going to tell the truth. He wasn't going to lie for anyone. And he did tell the truth. And the truth was basically a stake through Tony McCurchie's lie. In fact, Tony McCurchie got on the stand, and I made him admit that, yeah, I did say that the sheriff was a truthful and honest person. And, you know, if he says I said that, maybe I did, but it must have been in a different context or something. And the jury visibly reacted at that point, you know, when that testimony came out. This is the testimony that won the case.
Now, you mentioned that Sheriff Pickell testified truthfully, and he didn't want to be there.
Yes.
What do you mean he didn't want to?
He stands to lose the contract. I mean, if these people who are the type of people who retaliate, as David Terry said, why wouldn't they retaliate against the sheriff?
When you say lose a contract, he had deputies.
He's got a contract with the township, the sheriff does, to provide police services out there. See, when a township or a governmental entity doesn't want to have their own police force, they'll contract with someone who's already got a police force, like the sheriff. And the sheriff will perform police functions out there, including calling for towing companies and such. Right? So the sheriff's got that contract, which makes money for the sheriff. I mean, no criticism there, that's what he's supposed to do. He's supposed to get contracts that make money. But he stands to lose a contract here, so he had something at stake in that regard. It would have been easier for the sheriff to go along with McCurchie, see, but he wouldn't. He told the truth.
Well, now, what was the result in this case?
It was a verdict for $678,000, $300 of which was actually punitive damages. Damages to punish Tony McCurchie for what he did.
What was the allegations you made in your pleadings? What was the specific issue in this case?
It was a First Amendment retaliation case, all right, that my people went to City Hall and asked for help. Instead of getting help, and the irony here is that elected officials are supposed to help their constituents. They're supposed to help local businesses. They're not supposed to destroy them. And that's what they did here. They destroyed this business. The allegation was that when people go to City Hall and raise matters of public concern, the First Amendment to our United States Constitution says to the governmental bureaucrats, don't you dare retaliate against them for raising these matters of public concern. Don't you dare retaliate against them, because if you do, we're going to allow them to have a lawsuit. And if they can prove that that's what you did, we're going to hold you accountable for it. We're going to make you responsible for it. In fact, you know what I told the jury there in that trial, Bob? There's a big picture. It covers the whole wall in federal court in Detroit, and it's George Washington at the Constitutional Convention, and he's holding a copy of the Constitution in his hand. And I said to those jurors, you know what, you see that beautiful picture down there, you know, that represents our hope that we are protected by the Constitution? It's just a pretty painting on a wall. It's just a pretty piece of art unless you enforce it. You have to enforce it to give it meaning. And I guess they took that to heed, because they definitely enforced it. You don't see punitive damages against a public official in an amount of $300,000 maybe once every 5 or 7 years.
So obviously the jury was really upset by the action of McCurchie in violating these citizens' constitutional rights.
Yeah, I think they did their job. That is their job, is to punish, you know, and send a message to these governmental officials Don't do that to another family. Don't you dare wreck another family business in a fit of pique or in a fit of anger because you're bigoted. That's the message they were sending to Vienna Township. And I think the township, at least the insurance company for the township, got that loud and clear because they paid the $725,000.
Thank you. You know, as a result of this case, the Flint Journal wrote an editorial talking about, its headline is, and this was just this week, in fact, it says, power abuse. It says, supervisors' actions costly to Vienna Township. And it talks about the loser of the lawsuit for Vienna Township, which should have been avoided, leaves in its aftermath an aura of arrogance and abuse of power that residents should not want to tolerate.
Right.
And I think it's a pretty strong editorial, and I'm sure you might want to make a comment about it.
Yeah, I did read that, and I agree with you. It is a strong editorial, but I think it's altogether fitting and proper. I think the message of that editorial is that you know, when you're an elected governmental official, you have a lot of, people trust you, and you have a lot of responsibility to do the right thing. And you're expected to do the right thing. You're elected to do the right thing. And I think the Journal is basically saying it's not just a pulpit, you know, for someone's personal aggrandizement or gain or things like that. You should actually live up to the oath you're taking, you know, to faithfully discharge the laws and abide by them, including, of course, the United States Constitution, the First Amendment. You know, people aren't supposed to be punished when they cry for help to City Hall, when they ask for help. They're supposed to get help. And if you can't help them, at least do no harm. You're not supposed to retaliate against them. And I think it was a very proper editor's opinion there, a very good one. I agree with it 100%.
Okay.
Now, as I'm sure you could see from this interview, Papps represents the best the legal profession has to offer. He's enthusiastic and passionate for his client's cause and within the rules. He's very concerned about the rules. He's former president of the Bar Association, Trial Lawyers Association. So he's a very competent guy. But he does represent the best that the legal profession has to offer. And there's many, many fine attorneys out there that also fit that description. Now, in the interview, you heard Papps mention Sheriff Bob Pickel's role in the trial. Now, unlike many politicians that you've heard about and you've even seen, he was called upon a very difficult situation that he didn't want to be in, but he was truthful. Even if it might hurt his contract with McCurchie and Vienna Township, where he had a contract to supply additional police protection from the Genesee County Sheriff's Department. But he went there and he told the truth, to his credit. Now, as I say, we mentioned the Flint Journal's editorial. You have it here, power abuse, supervisor's action costly for Vienna Township, and he talks about these things. And here's what the Journal said about Pickel. It says, juries do not always render decisions with perfection, but in this case, Genesee County Sheriff Robert J. Pickel testified credibly that McCurchie had prohibited him from using Dave and Terry's towing in the event of an accident or other situations that require police to arrange vehicle removal. Deprived of the township business on which it had relied, the company eventually had to close. Most damning, company owner Terry Rojan testified that McCurchie had told her to hire a man to help her run her company because he did not believe she and her daughter were capable, which, if so, in effect deprived them of their livelihood out of sheer prejudice. The point here is that when they refused to agree to hire a man to replace her daughter, he retaliated against him. He says, okay, I'll fix you, and that's what happened. Now, if a citizen comes to an elected official with a problem, that doesn't mean the elected official can't disagree with what their argument is or what the results are that they want. Nothing wrong with that if you have a disagreement, but if you retaliate against them because you don't like what they said, that's a First Amendment violation. If you retaliate against them because you don't like the color of their skin or they're handicapped or whatever, that's another type of violation. You can't do those things. And that's what this editorial is saying, and that's what that judgment said, and that's what Mr. Pabst said when he was interviewed there. You can see the citizens of Vienna Township deserve better. You know, it looks like it's going to cost them a bundle of cash here. And then, equally important, the cost to the citizens, equally important, is that 2 other citizens of that community will run out of business just because they disagreed with McCurchie, and they said so. And he retaliated against them. That's illegal, and that's what this case is all about. I want to talk to you now about another case that just surfaced. In fact, it happened today. The result of it happened today, the end result. You might remember that we had this fellow named Julius Anthony that was hired by Superintendent Walter Milton to be the second in command of Flint School District about 2 years ago. During that time, he was in charge of programs and what have you, but had access to 16,000 Flint Board of Education children going to the Flint schools. About 8 months after he had been in there, it was disclosed, and I think Channel 12 was the one that broke the story, did good investigation reporting, that Mr. Anthony had a criminal record and the record indicated he was a pedophile. Now, here's a guy that was put in a position with having access to all these children who's a pedophile. Now, he's a close friend and business partner of this Walter Milton, who became superintendent. Milton hired him. They had lived together and went on for a long time. Now, what happened was that this case had occurred about 10 years ago. And there was supposed to be a follow-up, and apparently there was no follow-up on it. That the sentencing was, was not done, or it actually was done, but it was based on a plea of guilty by his attorney, because in Georgia for misdemeanors you can do that, but it was a sex case. And then Anthony claimed that he didn't authorize the attorney to do that, he didn't know anything about it, and that's why he didn't register as a sex offender when he came to Flint. A charge made by the county prosecutor here for not registering as a sex offender, because he was one according to the records of Georgia. He was charged as not registering as a sex offender. Later, when he went back to Georgia, he went to court on this same case and had it dismissed. Now, the Fulton County prosecutor in Atlanta, Georgia, was so outraged that this fellow would still have access to children, he brought the case again. 10-year-old case, and he convicted him on it. He convicted him on it. And today he was sentenced to 5 years prison and 3 years probation. Now, what's kind of unfortunate about this is that Bob Pickell and the sheriff and the prosecutor David Layton were kind of taken to the woodshed because they brought this guy in chains to appear in court originally for the violation of the failure to register, which ultimately was dismissed because the first case in Georgia was dismissed, and he hadn't registered. That case was dismissed by Layton after the case in Georgia was dismissed, as I say. Now, the unfortunate part about this whole thing is that this guy spent about 10 years with the superintendent of schools, Flint Schools, who is now superintendent in Springfield, Illinois, spent 10 years as his close friend, as his business partner, and Milton, who was the superintendent, said he didn't know about these things. But Anthony knew about it and always said in his applications he had never been convicted of any crime involving sexual activity with children. He was a liar. And they suffered the consequences. They were criticized for bringing him to court in chains when he failed to show up where he was supposed to show up, which is a regular procedure. Nothing unusual about that. The fellows who put the graffiti, the racial and sexual graffiti out in Flushing, when they were brought to court, they were brought in chains the same way. That's the procedure. And it seems to me those people who made those wild accusations about Layton and Piquel being racist because they did that really owe them an apology, because here they were dealing with a pedophile who had access for all these children in the Flint school system. He deserved no better. That's my opinion. Now, I might get criticized for that, but that's what I think of pedophiles. Now we have his sentencing to prison. There was a lawsuit that he and his attorney locally here brought against Piquel and Layton. I told you then when the lawsuit was brought, there was really no basis for the lawsuit because they have absolute immunity. But since that time, Anthony has dismissed the cases against him because they had no place to go. He can be thinking about it while he's in prison. But what the Fulton County prosecutor apparently was upset about is that this guy spent 10 years going from school to school district to school district, constantly exposed, continuously exposing these children to his pedophile attitude regarding children. So he got what he deserved. Should have gotten it a long time ago. It involved a 4-year-old child, a little boy in a child care center where he was working. Anyway, that case is over with now, and we can move on because there was a lot of talk and a lot of discussion, a lot of press on that case. People took sides. I think it's only one side now. He was a bad guy. He deserved to go to prison. When people tune in to your news broadcasts on television, I'm sure most believe they're going to get the straight story that is true and correct. Sometimes, however, news reporters may get some of the information wrong. But rarely does the reporter totally screw the story up so that you get the completely wrong story. The public is watching, and here we have a story that's important to them, and they can't get the completely wrong impression of the events the reporter is trying to convey. If this happens, often the reporter involved has to be considered not very bright or totally responsible for not checking his source. Now, this week, such a breakdown in good reporting happened on a news broadcast by Channel 12 that I think completely misrepresented the real facts of the story that were broadcast so that the public got the wrong impression of what really happened in this story. Here's the story that was incorrectly reported by Channel 12. Can you play that, please?
Dismissed criminal charges against two Genesee County businessmen charged with bilking the city of Flint out of more than $1 million in federal grant money. 65-year-old Joseph Giacalone of Flushing and his partner Daniel Robin were accused of pocketing $1.2 million in federal HUD money. Authorities say the two made a deal to open a vinyl distribution company in Flint, but they never broke ground on the project. The case was taken to the Michigan State Court of Appeals, where the charges were dismissed. Former Flint City grant manager Alex Thomas was charged in connection with this case back in 2005.
Flint police.
You know, the fact of the matter is, this case against Giacalone and others, the cases they had against them, were not dismissed, as Channel 12 suggests. Conversely, they've been reinstated by the Michigan Supreme Court on the two charges they were originally arrested on: obtaining money under false pretenses over $100 and larceny by conversion, both felonies. So they were completely wrong on the story. It's hard for me to understand how they come up with that conclusion. Now, a third defendant, the director of major grants for the city of Flint during recall Mayor Woodrow Stanley's tenure as mayor of Flint, he was charged with willful neglect of duty for agreeing to loan Joe Giacalone and his partner. They only got $1.2 million a suggested thing, but they agreed to loan him $7 million to build a window factory in the north end of Flint to hire unemployed people who live in that area. It was supposed to be located at that old OK plumbing company up there that's completely fallen apart and torn down. Now, the interesting thing about when they authorized this loan, it's very interesting. No credit check by Stanley and his rogues was made on Giacalone. None. Of course, he couldn't pass one. But to lend him $7 million with no credit check was unheard of. Then he never was asked to file a performance bond to cover the loan he was getting, which always was a past requirement in similar types of cases. Then the security supplied by Giacalone to get the loans was grossly exaggerated. In fact, he wasn't even asked to give a certification of any kind that the value of the property was correct. And this was not even checked. No one went out and looked at the property. Or they could have seen it was absolutely overvalued. And then, in those days, you had to have a construction license to do the work that Giacalone was doing, but you didn't have to be, I don't think you had to take the tests in those days when he got it. You just applied for it. The state licensing department, when we checked, said this guy had tons of complaints that they had, all kinds of complaints, and that was never checked by the city. Any one of these things, if they were checked, would have told him not to lend him the money. And then the most obvious failure was this loan was made to the most notorious criminal that ever went to prison from Genesee County area, Joe Giacalone. Now, do you really think all of these procedures were ignored just by chance, by coincidence. All these procedures were put in to protect the public's money. I just believe it was more than a coincidence that all of these things were overlooked. I think it was just a ripoff of the public, a scam. This whole thing was a scam. Now, you know, the proof here is really in the pudding, as they say. When our program learned, through our own investigation, about this loan, that Joe Giacalone was going to receive this money unfettered, I notified the public on this program that the money was being given to a crook, Joe Giacalone. How do I know it? When I was prosecutor, we prosecuted him for all kinds of crimes, and he went to jail originally for 60 to 80 years. It was that bad. Shot a man in one of our informants in Pennsylvania. Tried to hire a hitman to kill some of our witnesses. And he went to prison. Now, when he was in prison, he stayed 10 years, and they let him out. You know, to suggest that this guy was going to build a factory in the North End to hire unemployed people, this whole effort, in my mind, was a scam fabricated by Woodrow Stanley and his cronies on the city council. And I said on this program that money would be stolen. When we learned of the ripoff, for the first time, Giacalone had already been given $1,200,000 of that loan that he used to fix up his business in Leonard, Michigan, and pay back support payments to some woman in Pennsylvania who one of these defendants was on the hook to. This is money that was supposed to be used to build a factory in the North End of Flint. This loan was given. The money started going to Giacalone for a year and a half before we found out about it. And all they had to do, the council people, the mayor, is drive up North Saginaw Street to the old OK plumbing company, and you could see there was no factory being built, and they're still giving him the money. What's that tell you about this deal? Sheriff Bob Pickell started an investigation and had Giacalone and his partner and Stanley's frontman, Alex Thomas, charged with bilking the public out of $1,200,000 of taxpayers' money. One of the checks was $250,000 given by someone in the city to Joe Giacalone on city checks for $250,000 in his name alone. It doesn't say for this or for that or for his company, but Joe Giacalone. You know, it's a very serious crime that Channel 12 reported on and got it all wrong. You know, this case originally was recommended, this $7 million deal, $7,200,000 deal, was recommended for OK Business. They didn't, by Stanley, he didn't send it up with Giacalone's name. The thing went right through the city council. That was, they were all members then. Giacalone was always bragging about how much he was giving to the mayor and to the city council in big campaign contributions and whatever. So you have to wonder, what was going on here? These people sold out the citizens of Flint. The only person that objected to that said, who is OK Industries? I want to know that. was Peggy Cook, and she was ignored. They really kind of just blew it off and just went on and passed it. She voted against it. She had enough sense to vote against it. You know, the bottom line here is Channel 12 was contacted by the authorities and told this story was wrong. And apparently they've never corrected it. Again, leaving the public clearly with the wrong impression of the real story. You know, in my mind, such a lack of response to the truth is an act of journalistic irresponsibility. So this case is going to court. These people are facing 10 years in prison because that's the penalty for conviction of these crimes. Be interesting to see what happens here and when we'll get to court, but the Supreme Court just came down last week, the end of last week, and said these people should be tried. So we'll be watching for you for at least the next 4 weeks. Hey, whoever wins this Flint mayoral election, this program, for as long as we will be around here for the next 4 weeks, will keep you informed of the real truth, good and bad, that is going on in City Hall. You know, one of the important issues I told you I was concerned about was the collaboration between Stanley and his corrupt machine with Williamson's opponent, Mr. Rawling. You know, we showed you that Charles Winfrey, who was run out of City Hall for violating laws down there and the election laws, he was running Walling's campaign. For Lois Fletcher, the attorney who made hundreds of thousands of dollars when Stanley was mayor, because Stanley kept hiring him to defend the city. And he would submit his vouchers, and whatever the voucher said, they paid. Now, interestingly enough, the person who oversaw the paying of these vouchers was Lois Fletcher's former partner, one by the name of McDonald. She just rubber stamped it. And then we have Jim Sharp, who was a former mayor of Flint. He's employed by the person that you really have to be careful with, Anthony Suave, identified as a major organized crime figure in the Detroit area. He was hired to keep local government friendly to him, Suave. Now, I know Jim Sharp a lot of times. Jim Sharp is a very pleasant, nice guy. I like Jim Sharp. But the fact of the matter is he was tied to Suave, who was an organized crime figure. I don't know if Jim Sharp had anything to do with organized crime, I'm suggesting, but he promoted Mr. Suave. And then they had Eric Mays running his absentee ballot operation in this election. Eric Mays. He ran the absentee ballot program for Walling. Mays has been investigated numerous times for fraudulent preparation and gathering of absentee ballots. He has 2 felony convictions, one for assault on a woman with a gun and another for assaulting a woman with a car. Tried to run her down. He was convicted of aggravated assault. Or aggravated, I should say, stalking. Then you have Donna Poplar constantly supporting him. He was convicted. She was convicted of fraud for being involved in a phony scam operation to try to give the impression that she was bribing a public official. And then you have, there was an ad that they had on television that had these 4 council people and a number of other former council people. There were 4 of these people each. Remember them? Coleman, Horgan, Sims, who's still on the council, and a guy named Ed Taylor, 2nd Ward councilman. Remember, they're the people who fraudulently gave themselves retroactive back pay. Remember that? And they each owe the city between $16,000 and $20,000 for that back pay that he shouldn't have got. The Attorney General went to court and won the case, and the court ordered them to pay it back. And they still haven't paid it back. Now the question I have, these are the kind of people he's associating himself with. And then you say that in this case, has Walling made a deal with these 4 people who owe all this money, and they're $80,000 to the city of Flint? Is he going to let them off the hook? We'll be watching that, and you should be watching it. These people, this is a gang of rogues. Walling has surrounded himself with. What's that tell you about him? You know, we'll be watching that, certainly, as we go along here. Now, here's the real concern as I see it here, is whether Stanley and Sharp are going to do Suave, you know, a close associate of these guys, into their newfound ability to influence Walling. You know, who is Suave? Am I making this up? Suave is a guy that applied for a license, a gambling license in Detroit, and was turned down by the state because of his organized crime connections. When he tried to get into New Jersey with his garbage company to pick up garbage and to get contracts for garbage in New Jersey, the New Jersey Attorney General refused to allow him to come in there to do business because of his ties to organized crime. How do I know that? I talked to the Assistant Attorney General from New Jersey when we first disclosed this on our program about 2 years ago. I talked to the man who was head of the Organized Crime Division for the New Jersey Attorney General's office. He said they wouldn't let him in because of his association with organized crime. And then on this program, sometime back, I read you the transcript of phone conversations that were taped by the FBI between people who described how Suave had given the order to blow up certain trucks. In this particular case, I think it was Mount Clemens was going to privatize their garbage collection, and they took bids. And then Suave made a bid. Apparently he figured he was going to get the contract, but somebody came in lower than he did. This man had a company out in Oakland County. One day, he had a number of trucks. All of a sudden, they all got blown up. And the man ultimately withdrew from his bid with Mount Clemens, and it went to Suave. In these telephone conversations between these people, the talk was that Suave had ordered it. Now, Suave wasn't on the telephone, but these people who were organized crime people who were ultimately arrested for blowing up the trucks described in these telephone conversations that the order was given by Suave. Now, this is the guy that Sharp and Stanley associate with. Suave put all kinds of political fundraisers on for Stanley, Ann Arbor, Detroit, even in Canada where he had some of his trucks. Now, he sold city garbage through another company, which is a major company in the United States now, but he has something, I think it was like $700 million he got in stock, what have you. So he's a major stockholder in this nationwide garbage company that now has all the business in it pretty much in the country. And he'll be up here again doing the same thing he did when Stanley was in there. Here, just to give you an example of what happened when Stanley became mayor and Suave came in for his due, as they say. Stanley recommended that Suave be used to pick up the compost out there on Carpenter Road. Had been piling up for years. And the bid was not near $900,000. When I went to the council for approval, people like Scott Kincaid and Peggy Cook and them, you know, they thought it was just too high a price and refused to go along with it. So it was turned down. The next year, they took bids again, and Suave got the bid this time, for $35,000. A difference of almost $800,000, more than $800,000, just because the city council stood up and did the right thing. And then he comes in one time on a sole source deal. Sole source is kind of a procedure where you don't have to take bids because there's nobody that can bid against you. There's probably just one source for it. And this was some kind of cameras that were on wires that you could, videos you could put into the sewer system, run it down a sewer, and you could see where the break was. Well, it came in, this company made a bid, and it was a sole source. There's not supposed to be somebody within 100 miles or 150 miles that could also bid. And it was automatically given to this company. Well, as it turned out, when we checked it out, the company belonged to Anthony Suave, and it was just organized prior to the bid being made. And as it turned out, when ultimately the decision on the bid being accepted was accepted, it turned out that Suave's company that had gotten the bid went off to a company in Toledo which could have bid if they knew about it, but since the city administration claimed it was a sole source, they didn't know about the bid. Suave hired that company to do the job for substantially less than what he got the bid for. It was a phantom company, and he got the extra money and over what he paid the Toledo company. That's the kind of thing that goes on there. And that was your tax money. Then you have the Giacalone case. He's involved in that, makes that recommendation with none of these checks that I've described to you that should have been made. Now you've got to watch this situation now. What he'd like to do is privatize the garbage collection in the city of Flint. And you can bet, in my opinion, if that happens, you watch the prices go up, that you'll be paying to have your garbage picked up, because you'll have to pay for the privatization if they come in as a private garbage company, Mr. Suave. We'll see what happens there, and I'll be watching that. So we have all of these things. And this is what I mean. Stanley, here's the example of Stanley standing in the background quickly. That has just sprung up here in the last 6 or 7 months with Ron Founder, the Flint Journal's investigative reporter reporting on it. That has to do with Career Alliance. This was another example of Stanley's control of the operation. He had Pam Loving, the executive director who has now been fired, appointed about 8 years ago. And during that period of time, he had Career Alliance entering contracts with all his friends. And half the time, they didn't even do the job. Do you remember the Flint Family Road? This was a company that Career Alliance entered into a contract with, and no one knows what for. There was some general statement of that it was supposed to, Family Road was promoted as a new way to help pregnant women, new mothers and fathers become better parents by providing information and advice. The money was given, they're looking for $200,000 in this case. The money was given to this company. There's no evidence that they even received the money or how it was spent. As far as we know, it went in somebody's pocket. No one knows. And who was in this group? Charles Winfrey, Stanley's guy, who is now running Walling's campaign, was on the board of directors. The guy that ran the Flint or the Stanley Foundation, in my mind a phony organization, he was on this board of directors. And none of these people can tell you. Helen Williams, who was the executive director, was a friend of Pam Loving's when they were on the Board of Education together. She's gone for the last 6 months. Nobody really knows exactly where she is. She just left. The money can't be accounted for. It's $200,000 of your dollars. No one knows where it is. This is what happens when Stanley has the influence and the power to impact people's decision making. And that's what I'm concerned about. If Walling is elected, and now it's, you're seeing this program between 8:30 and 9 on Tuesday night, the election is over, the votes are in, we don't know who's going to win, but if Walling wins, those are things that you have to be concerned about. You didn't have to be concerned about it with Williamson, because he had the money. They couldn't bribe him. They couldn't do anything with him. He just had a big mouth, that's all. But a lot of mayors have big mouths. But anyway, we have this career alliance, which is an indication of what could happen. Williamson or Stanley ran that organization by putting his top person in there, and then she distributed the money, and that's why there's a major investigation now by the state is looking into this, the federal government is looking into it, and the sheriff's department has its own criminal investigation trying to find out what happened to this money, because it went to all kinds of people, relatives and friends, and nobody knows where this $200,000 is gone. And that's just kind of a drop in the bucket, because there was millions of dollars. This Career Alliance was getting over $20 million a year in tax money and private foundation money. And it's very difficult to trace it. And all these people hired were friends of Stanley's, were relatives of various people on that board. Pam Loving's son, Pam Loving's husband, all involved making money off Career Alliance. That's what happens when you tie with Stanley. He wants something in return. And Walling, in my opinion, if he's elected, can't ignore this commitment he has made by using his people and some of the other rogues that he's tied into his campaign. Suggests to me, and in Walling's case, if he wins, it's winning at any cost, and it may cost him his integrity. Well, his time is up, and we have about 3-4 more programs, and we'll have more things to say, but in the meantime, till next week, we'll be at the White Horse.